I'm coming to you from the Sydney WorldPride 2023 Mardi Gras Parade. I am at the beginning of Oxford Street and I'm in the marshalling area watching all these beautiful people come together tonight for the parade. You're going to hear the voices of people with disability in the rainbow community talk about intersectionality and the importance of disability inclusion. We're taking a bit of a break from our regularly scheduled program over the next few weeks. I don't know if you've noticed, but it is Sydney WorldPride 2023. I'll be bringing you interviews from all over the place, highlighting the voices of people with disabilities in this community.
My name is Aspen, I use he, him pronouns, and I'm with Aspect or Autism Spectrum Australia.
Hello, I'm Dr. David Abello. I'm a 78er and a disability activist, a long-time member of PWDA, some 40-something years I think now, and here I am with people with disability in the parade again.
I'm your host, Susan Wood, and you'll hear from Aspen Luke, a 17-year-old who's about to participate in his first Mardi Gras on the Autism Australia Aspect Float, and Dr. David Abello, who participated in the first ever gay and lesbian Mardi Gras in 1978, and this year was on the 78ers float. Now, it's so weird that I'm actually doing this interview from a train right now. I got on the train at Rhodes and you're going to be in the parade, and I'm like, awesome, better interview you. Why are the voices of people with disabilities so important in this community, and especially with Sydney WorldPride going on right now?
Well, there's so many intersections within our communities, especially being autistic and all that. There's a lot more people identifying as queer, and it's very important to be inclusive of us because there is so many of us. It's important that people know that disabled queer people exist, and the more people that know about us, the more inclusive it gets, because currently Pride is not inclusive, it is not accessible, especially with Fair Day and Mardi Gras in general. So with Fair Day, when I was there, the grounds weren't wheelchair accessible.
This year?
Yeah. At all. And last year, it was basically impossible for me to get around in my wheelchair. I had to rely on my crutches, and there weren't many people that were willing to help me out, get out of the way and all that.
I was talking to someone last week and they were saying, they were just giving some statistics. So in New South Wales, 25% of people living in New South Wales are people who identify as having a disability, which is the biggest percentage of the minorities, at least in Australia and in New South Wales. Having a disability, being part of this community, being in the parade tonight, it's really important that people see you, right?
Yeah, and also anyone can become disabled at any point in time. It is basically the one marginalised community that something can happen and bam, you're disabled. It doesn't happen with any other community. And so we really need that inclusiveness because more people are becoming disabled, which isn't a bad thing. It's pretty epic. But yeah, since anyone can become disabled, it needs to be more inclusive.
Yeah. How do people find you? Do you want people to find you online?
Yeah, so I have 2 social media accounts on Instagram and on Facebook. My accounts are called Authentically Aspen. You can chuck me a follow, say hi and everything. I'm pretty active on there.
Do you want to answer a couple of questions, Mother?
Hi, I'm Christy. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Aspen's parent.
Why do you feel like you need to strongly support this tonight?
Well, I'm personally part of the queer community, but also I have 2 children who identify as being part of the Rainbow Brigade. So one who is only 10 and one who's 17. So for me, it's important that my kids can see that families like ours exist and that we are just as important as everybody else and our families are represented. Both of my kids are autistic, and so there's of course that intersectionality between disability and queerness, and we need to show that we are just as important as every other family out there.
And in your observation, what can be done for more inclusivity?
Listen to the people who are disabled. Their voices are the ones we need to listen to. They're the ones that have the issues facing them immediately and directly. So their voices are the ones that need to be amplified, and they're the ones that need to be heard in places such as government and business and state, local, federal government. Their voices are the ones that need to be heard, not the politicians and not the ones with the money. It's the people that have the disabilities and that need the support that need to be listened to.
Awesome. Well, have a great time tonight, guys. Happy Mardi Gras. It is Sydney WorldPride and we are at Mardi Gras right now. Are you excited?
I've put in a lot of work this year for the 78ers and the first Mardi Gras. We published a book which came from the printers a couple of weeks ago. One of the best insights I think that we've done so far. It's called Voices from 1978. And I feel I've invested quite a lot of effort into this Mardi Gras, and I'm determined to, even though I won't be able to walk for a week, that I am going to walk.
You're going to walk the full distance?
Yeah, it's I'm not going to beat myself with a leather strap though. I like being on the road, and that's where it started, on the road. And there is a real sense of being transgressive. Like, I'm in the middle of Oxford Street. It's a space that's normally alienated from everyone. It's the only place where you can see both sets of street fronts. Either side, you get a new perspective on the space. You perhaps get a sense of what it used to be and how important it used to be.
For people who might not be familiar, do you want to give a bit of background on the 78ers?
Yeah, okay. The 78ers happened because of a confluence of a number of things that were going on. We had an incredibly corrupt police force, far from any form of legitimate authority. We had a new Labor government, a Labor Premier, Neville ran. We became the political football, because if they attacked us, they were attacking the Premier's constituency and causing him embarrassment, and him having to defend the police and not us, And so I think that was part of the savagery in this. But that was one thing, the police. The other thing was that we had neoliberal economic anarchy in the Northern Hemisphere. Imperialist, adventuring, colonialist economy, and also a new far-right religious right that wanted to turn back all of the gains that had been made. One of them, for instance, was the Briggs Initiative in San Francisco. The Briggs Initiative would have stopped homosexuals from teaching in schools or working in public sector jobs. So they called on people around the world to have an international Gay Homosexual Solidarity Day, and we had a meeting, called for a meeting in the social groups, political groups and so on, community groups at the time, set up Gay Solidarity Group. At the second meeting, we finalised the events for the International Day. We had a big demonstration in the morning through the city of 500 people. We've never had that many people before. We saw our own diversity for the first time in the flesh. A lot of arguing, a lot of fighting, the Palestinians and the Israelis, the leather queens and the radical lesbians, and so on, sort of tensions you'd expect. But it was, in a sense, a really new thing too. We had a seminar in the afternoon about homosexual rights movements at the time around the world, in keeping with the theme of the day, and then we had the parade in the evening. We had a permit for the parade for approximately 200 people. It was going to go down Oxford Street into Hyde Park, here where we are now. Little party, and then we go home. 2,000 people turned up. The police didn't know what to do. They were unprepared. There were not many of them. they decided they would let us go ahead, but they pushed from behind. So we almost ran down Oxford Street, trying to dance to the corny old music on the music truck. We got down here to College Street. We were trapped pretty much. There was nowhere to go. And it was about 11:15, something like that. And this was a town that used to shut up at 6 o'clock, you know. And so we sat here, just a group of us got together. What will we do? We decided to go to King's Cross because it was, one, the only place where there'd be people, and so therefore, and people who weren't very happy with the police generally, and two, we needed to go somewhere where there would be witnesses for what was about to happen to us. So we had a couple of speeches at El Alamein Fountain, then we turned to disperse, and then we realised, of course, they blocked every exit behind the fountain, every side street, the two sides of Darlinghurst Road. They hoed in the crowd. They tried to arrest everybody. People resisted really valiantly. They got severely beaten for the privilege, some of them. Had people having their heads banged against the side of paddy wagons or thrown halfway into one and have the doors smashed over their legs. People had permanent injury, certainly permanent post-traumatic stress disorders from that time, and continue to. After the thing kind of was over, we went to Darlinghurst Police Station. There were more people arrested at the front of the police station because we pushed our ways into the doors after they shut them, so they couldn't open them again. But importantly, what we did was yell out people's names who were inside. Or if we heard someone was getting bashed up, we were yelling out, "Who's bashing Peter Murphy?" or whoever it might be. Someone else would come out and say all of the false names that people had been given when they were arrested, so people who'd put their deposits up would get their money back. There were quite a few Roger Casements and Rita Mae Browns, and I think there was even a Karl Marx. Even in ugliness there's humour, I think. We had a big demonstration down in Liverpool Street, just also near where we are. At the police courts there on the Monday morning. The police closed the courts. The magistrate complained officially about the police closing the court because it meant that people couldn't come in and for their hearings. We were outside. There were a lot of people arrested there. So we had quite a few more protests through the year in the Drop to Charges campaign. We carried on for another year like that. There were 200 and something people arrested through that time. We got most of them off because of technicalities about the notice police gave and the time they allowed for people to disperse and those sorts of things. That was a big year. It changed activism, it changed our relationship with the police, it changed the relationship between the movement and the community, certainly. It was the beginning of the movement becoming more inclusive of women, more diverse, not just middle class gay men in their male-only places. I think it was the start of a movement towards sophistication, is what I say, about having not just inclusion but a knowing inclusion. You don't include people by adding letters. You have to change the discourse of the whole if you're going to do that. So you don't just put disability accessible at the end. It's not an afternote. It's one of the rationales for action.
As you were sharing the history, my eyes went wide at least 400 times, and just the very stark contrast between your story that you're telling now and us right now at the beginning of Oxford Street, with everybody just super excited, thousands and thousands of people here to support you and everyone
We had a party on the train.
had a party on the train. And you were talking about disability, diversity and inclusion. What have your observations been for how disability has been included, not in just this community, but specifically this parade, I guess?
I've always argued that disability and queer have a lot in common as terms. One, they're two of the most misused terms in sociology and common language. But more importantly, they both, particularly for young people, but anyone who wants to come out as a sexual person, is pushing back against resistance, against normalisation, against embodied shame or the shame of others, or the power of others to control how people feel about themselves and their narratives and the way they explain their wonder of themselves, you know. So I think they're very similar like that, and I've been active in that intersection of disability and queer for 40 years. And in that time, like I had a federal government job, I remember in 1987 it was, and I was a state disability coordinator for Department of Employment, Education and Training. So in the first few weeks I did a tour of places I didn't know, and I went off to see one of these, I won't name them, very large residential organisations that housed women. And they showed me the dorms, you know, and I walked around in horror like I was in some death camp or some fucking thing. And when that was over, she said, "Oh, now I'm saving the best for last. Come and have a look at our sheltered workshop." And this was their pride and joy. And people weren't working on any contract work. They weren't doing anything useful except for the residential setting. There was nothing right about that. You know, congregation and segregation of people is wrong. It's always wrong. It never succeeds. It never achieves what it means to. You know, you cannot protect people from life. You can equip people for life, you know. You can encourage them. That's a very different thing than try to protect people. But one of the examples I wrote about recently, which is probably a good thing to think about over the years, I ran into a boy called Kevin. And I happened just up the street here. He was lost. He was a young man with an intellectual disability. He was gay. Sort of my gay disability radar told me that. He was lost. He wanted to get home to the Central Coast. And he'd come down to Sydney for a route. Someone he exchanged business cards with. The person tried to do things that he didn't want them to do. He walked around all night. He ran into me in the morning. I brought him into here, Hyde Park, and we sat in the shade. And then I walked him, you know, when he was feeling okay, I walked him up to Central Station and bought him a ticket and put him on the train. And, you know, I was writing about this recently, and then I realised, by comparison to now, if Kevin, that was not his real name, you know, but if Kevin was that age, he would probably be in an individually supported house. For one thing, if he was in a group house, there would be rules. The organisation would have and has a disability policy that's explicit about privacy, about masturbation, sex, relationships, marriage, and also the right to have appropriate support for decisions about sexual choices and relationship choices, you know, and ideas of consent and, you know, what a meaningful relationship is when you've only experienced abuse in those sorts of settings. And so that sort of encapsulated or crystallised for me how much things have changed. I can look at that company's website and it's there, black and white. There are parallels for all of us, I think, who've been forced into those settings or had to live in them permanently or over time, be it the disability sector, the mental health sector.
I think from your story, the biggest takeaway of all of it was the lack of respect component and the general idea of respect. What needs to happen?
The more you want, the harder it is. So the things that we still need, in a sense of diversity and inclusion, are the things that we have to tell each other about ourselves and our lives that form the basis of that inclusion and diversity. So what is important? So that's the first thing, The things I think that are still important are people being regarded for their achievements, people who have extraordinary achievements that are underrated or unobserved or unnoticed. People like me, except when I talk like this. I think there are lots of important things around. I think intersex was a really important issue around the disability movement and the queer movement, in the sense that there were key intersex activists who were also queer and in the queer movement. But for instance, the Senate inquiry into the forced sterilisation of women with disability, Intersex Australia put its submission in on the back of that and got a whole lot of concessions and things sent off to committees and further discussions about intersex being about disability. So, that's a really interesting historical intersection. I think we need to do that a lot more. I think transgender movement is forcing a social change that's quite fundamental. I commonly now hear people in my neighbourhood say, my boy's challenging his gender identity, I'm so proud of him. Oh, my boy's joined a gay rowing group in Canberra, I'm so proud of him. It's not about normalising things, it's about making them commonplace and ordinary, so that you do notice things, they don't remain invisible. So I think transgender is the big one. And I think always, in the future, we don't know what the future has in store. We never do. In 1978, I had no idea where the future would take us. I had no idea any of this would happen. You couldn't predict it. The same with the disability movement. We'll never run out of things. The people with severe disability and the rights to use NDIS money to not pay for but access and prepare for and travel to their appointments with sex workers. We had I don't know how to typify them really. Go away, you boys. Cute but noisy. We've been talking about this since we started Access Plus in 1998, which mainly came out of the disability movement. We fought unsuccessfully to integrate in any meaningful way with the gay community of the time, but it did make for a very queer-friendly disability movement. But we were talking about these issues then, over and over, repetition. It wasn't just about paying for being able to get access to services, but more importantly, training the industry in learning how to give people pleasure, taking the time to find out what the pleasure is, not doing the gloved 5-minute hand job, putting the money in your wallet. Yeah.
God, that sounds really awful.
Well, these are the sort of experience some of my friends have had in the past. It turns them off trying altogether. And, I think the sex workers I've met, they really enjoy that work because it's totally individual, totally exploratory, and extends them all the time when they're learning about people. And, there's no place for puritanical thinking, oh, that shit, that has to go. I should hope we're at the end of the innocent child phase in disability discourse, and that we're allowed to be not just sexual but recognised as sexual and regarded as, wonderful people in the fullness. And, we can be nice, we can be bastards, we can be unselfish, we can be self-seeking, we can do all those things that other people do. So we're quite normal in one sense.
Do you have any final thoughts before you get on the float? The float is huge.
My background has been very important, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you might have given up like I nearly did on the other side of the fence down there. Let me out of here, I'm going home. And it used to be a nightmare every year in the early days of Mardi Gras. So no matter what they learn in one year, you'd have to start all over again the next time, and there'd be trucks in the disability parking area that had been agreed to, and the disability accessible toilets would be on the other side of the fence and all that stuff, and we'd in some shitty part of the parade and get no comment from the media as we go past Taylor Square. All that's, it's demeaning in a way, demeaning of the effort and so.
I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. Like you said before, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. One day.
Oh, well, now people walk around and say, like on the train coming here, in the queue, in the streets, we hardly didn't get here for people wanting to take selfies with us and tell us how great we were and how good we were. And I said to a few of them, we didn't do something brilliant in the past, not 45 years ago. We've been doing it ever since. That's why it's all still happening. But anyway.
Well, good luck with everything tonight, and really good for you to how long is the park?
The actual parade I know, but I'm not telling myself.
Okay. We're not going to talk about it because you're going to definitely make it through the...
It's uphill.
It's fine. It's going to be fine, David.
Oh, look, I did it a couple of years ago, and the next year I was president of PWDA. It's good to be here. It's good to be with everyone. Yeah, I've been talking a lot to major corporations, their queer caucuses, and that used to be ugly capitalism, that we would never speak to capitalism. But it's funny, you take things in new directions, and who knows, they're the allies, our allies of the future, in a sense. And possibly people we might have written off years ago for being no strategic value or being wrong. People only know what they know, and as one of my sayings, people don't come magically to your position.
You've been listening to Have the Nerve, a podcast by Spinal Cord Injuries Australia. This episode has been written, produced and edited by me, Susan Wood. Logo art by Kobe Ann Moore. You can find the links to everyone we've spoken to in the show notes below. If you're listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please consider throwing us a 5-star review. Your review will help this podcast get out there. And if you'd like more information on SCIA, please visit scia.org.au. In fact, visit our resource hub. You'll find all episodes, including this one, on our resource hub and other information for people with disabilities. Thank you for listening.